The meeting was over. Mr. Davies, the man from GeoCorp Minerals, smiled the kind of polished, patient smile that signaled the successful end of a long negotiation. He looked around the small community hall, at the 10 landowners seated on folding chairs, men and women who had farmed this valley for generations. They looked tired. They looked resigned. They looked ready to sign. A large, glossy map of the proposed Northern Basin Lithium project was propped on an easel, its bold red lines carving up the familiar landscape of their lives. Davies rested a hand on his tailored suit jacket, a gesture of finality. "We've made our final offer," he had said, "and it is more than generous. Now, if there are no further questions." The scrape of a chair from the back of the room cut through the quiet hum of the ventilation. One woman stood. She was not one of the landowners on the project map. She had been sitting silently for the entire 2-hour presentation, a cardboard tube held across her lap. Alara Vance. Her work boots were clean but scuffed at the toe. Dust, faint but present, clung to the cuffs of her jacket. She did not look at Davies. She looked at the glossy map. "I have a question about Parcel 7B, she said. Her voice was even conversational, as if asking about the weather. Davies' smile tightened by a millimeter, the only sign of his annoyance at this last-minute interruption. He glanced at his associate, who flipped through a binder. "Parcel 7B, the associate whispered. "It's the old Vance plot. 40 acres. Unproductive scree. We acquired it in the county tax auction last month." Davies' professional smile returned, now tinged with a faint note of pity. "Ma'am, that parcel has already been consolidated into the project perimeter. The county records are quite clear." He was speaking to her as one might speak to a confused child. Alara Vance took a slow step forward. She placed the cardboard tube on the edge of the long folding table where Davies and his team sat. She didn't answer his statement directly. Instead, she spoke to the room, to the county clerk sitting at the end of the table. The land was never for sale. The mineral rights were never for sale. A pause. A silence that was heavier than the one before. Davies let out a short, controlled sigh, a puff of air that said this was a waste of everyone's time. He was a man who collected schedules, who saw the world as a series of meetings to be concluded. This was a loose thread he now had to snip. "Ma'am," he began again, his tone firm but still professionally gentle. "GeoCorp Minerals purchased the land from the county. The title is clean. We have the deed. It's a standard foreclosure proceeding for unpaid taxes. Perhaps there's been a misunderstanding on your part." Alara Vance looked at him then, for the first time. Her eyes were calm. "There is no misunderstanding. I paid the taxes. I have paid them every year for 38 years. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small, worn leather billfold. From it, she took a folded piece of paper. A receipt. She placed it on the table next to the cardboard tube. The room was quiet. The other landowners, who had been gathering their coats, stopped. They turned. A phone that had been about to be answered was silenced. Some men collect problems. Alara Vance collected patience, and she had brought it with her today. The man from GeoCorp, Mr. Davies, was the kind of man whose confidence was a structural element of his being, like bone. It held him upright, shaped his posture, and informed the easy, accommodating smile he offered to the landowners. He saw them not as people but as variables in a complex equation that had already been solved back at headquarters. His job was simply to walk them through the pre-written proof. The equation was built on a foundation of assumptions. The first assumption was that the land was poor. This was easy to believe. For a century, the parcels on the north slope of the valley were known as the Sour 40 or the goat pasture. Land that couldn't hold water or grow anything but scrub brush and stubborn, rocky weeds. It was land you passed on the way to somewhere better. The second assumption was that the people who owned it were poor, or at least tired enough to be tempted by a sudden infusion of cash. GeoCorp's offers were, on the surface, generous. They offered twice the assessed value for land that was, by all local metrics, nearly worthless. For men and women facing another year of drought and rising costs, it felt like a rescue. The third and most important assumption was that what everyone believes to be true, and what is recorded in the most recent public documents is the whole truth. Institutions run on this principle. It is the bedrock of bureaucracy. The county's online database showed Parcel 7B as delinquent, then auctioned, then sold. The case was closed. For Davies, this was not a point of debate. It was data. Alara Vance was an anomaly, a piece of contradictory data. He processed her presence first with dismissal, then with a carefully managed display of professional concern. His legal associate, a younger man with a tablet, leaned over and whispered again. Her payment was recorded late, after the delinquency notice was filed but before the auction was finalized. It's a clerical error, a timing issue. We can get it sorted. Davies nodded, relieved. A clerical error was something he understood. It was a smudge on an otherwise perfect document, easily wiped away. He addressed Alara again, his voice now full of reassuring warmth. Mrs. Vance, it appears there's been a simple clerical error down at the county office.
A mitimed feeling.
It happens. A real shame. But the fact is, the auction proceeded based on the information available at the time. GeoCorp acted in good faith. Our purchase is legally binding. However, he paused, letting the word hang in the air. He was about to be magnanimous, to show the other landowners how reasonable he could be. In the interest of community goodwill, we are prepared to compensate you for your trouble. We will, of course, reimburse you for the property taxes you paid. And we will add a small premium, say 10%, for the inconvenience. He smiled again, a closing gesture. The problem was solved. Alara Vance did not smile back. She said nothing. She simply stood by the table, her hand resting on the cardboard tube. Her silence was not passive. It was active, took up space in the room. It was an answer in itself. The answer was no. The other landowners watched. They had seen this kind of corporate confidence before. They had also seen the quiet, immovable certainty of their own people, a stubbornness born of living on hard land. They did not know what was happening, but they recognized the shape of the contest. It was new money against old patience. To understand why, you have to go back 38 years, to 1983. Alara's father, Thomas Vance, was a geologist for the state, a quiet man who spent his life looking at what lay beneath the surface of things. He saw the world in layers, in strata, in deep time. He trusted rock more than he trusted words. He had a theory about the valley, a theory his colleagues at the survey office politely dismissed. They called it Vance's folly. He believed a massive, unrecorded pegmatite intrusion, a type of igneous rock formation, ran deep under the north slope. These formations were sometimes, not always, rich in rare earth minerals. Lithium, spodumene. He spent his weekends walking the sour acres, taking core samples with a hand auger, breaking rocks with his hammer. He brought the samples home, crushing them into powder in the garage and running his own primitive assays in the quiet of the night. He filled dozens of notebooks with meticulous, hand-drawn charts and chemical notations. Alara, then a young woman, would watch him. She learned the language of his obsession. She learned the smell of crushed rock and the different weights of stone in her hand. He would show her the samples under a magnifying glass. "See that, Ellie?" he'd say, pointing to a faint crystalline structure. "That's the ghost. Everyone else is looking at the dirt. They forget the fire that came before the dirt." When the 40-acre parcel came up for a private sale, listed in the paper for next to nothing, he bought it. He paid $900 in cash, money he and his wife had saved for a new roof. She didn't argue. She trusted his quiet conviction. He walked the land as if it were a sacred place. He knew he would never have the capital to drill, to prove what was there. The technology of the time made it prohibitively expensive. "This wasn't for me," he told Alara one evening, standing at the fence line. "This is for the person who comes after. Some things you plant for the next man." He went to the county courthouse with his old deed and a new survey map he had drawn himself. It wasn't an official survey, but it was, to his mind, more accurate than the county's own plat map. On his map, he had marked the coordinates of the deep formation he believed was there. He filed a special addendum. a mineral rights severance. It was a legal maneuver, uncommon but not unheard of, that separated the ownership of the surface from the ownership of what lay beneath. He paid the small filing fee. The clerk, a man he knew from church, stamped his receipt and his copy of the deed and told him he'd enter it into the main ledger. Thomas Vance put his stamped copy of the deed, the hand-drawn map, and the receipt into a cardboard tube. He gave it to Alara. "Don't ever lose this," he said, "and don't ever sell. Not the land, and especially not the rights. People will only want it when they figure out what it is. And by then, they'll try to tell you it's not yours." Thomas Vance died in the winter of 1995. He died with his theory unproven, his name associated with a gentle, harmless eccentricity. His notebooks were filed away in a box in Alara's attic. For years, the cardboard tube sat in the back of her closet. Life went on. Alara married, raised a son, worked for 3 decades at the county library, a place of quiet order and verifiable facts. Every year, in October, the property tax bill for Parcel 7B would arrive. It was never much. It started at $47 a year and slowly crept up to $62. Some years, when money was tight, paying it felt like a foolish indulgence, an act of faith in a dead man's ghost story. Her husband, a practical man who ran a small engine repair shop, never understood it. "It's 40 acres of nothing," he'd say, not unkindly. "We could use that money." She would just nod. "It's a promise," she'd answer. She never explained it further. She didn't need to. It was a matter of private honor. It was the one thing that was hers alone, a connection to the quiet, certain man who had taught her to look deeper than the surface. The promise was not about getting rich. It was about proving her father right. It was about vindication for a man who was never boastful, who never asked for recognition, but who had been quietly certain of the truth he had found. After her husband passed away and her son moved to the city, the annual ritual of paying the tax became even more significant. It was a pilgrimage. She would drive to the county courthouse herself, walk up the old marble steps, and hand her check to the clerk. She liked the physicality of it, the act of handing over the payment and getting the stamped receipt. She didn't trust mailing it. She wanted to see the transaction completed, to know the promise was secure for another year. 3 weeks before the meeting in the community hall, she had made that trip as usual. She handed her check to a new, young clerk who seemed distracted. He typed her parcel number into his computer. "Oh," he said, looking at the screen with mild confusion. "This parcel is slated for the tax auction. It's delinquent." Alara felt a cold stillness spread through her chest. "That's not possible," she said. "I've paid it every year." The young man shrugged. "System says it's delinquent." A notice was sent. She never received a notice. He turned the screen toward her. It showed a balance due from the previous year. "Paid," she said. "I paid it. Right here. Last October." The clerk looked helpless. "I don't know what to tell you. It's not showing here." It was a digital error, a glitch in a new software system the county had implemented. A payment made but not correctly registered. A ghost in the machine. She knew arguing with the young man was pointless. She paid again for the current year and the phantom arrears. He gave her a receipt. "Can you make sure this is removed from the auction list?" she asked. He nodded, already looking at the next person in line. "I'll flag it for the supervisor." She left the courthouse with a deep sense of unease. The system. Everyone trusted the system. But she had learned from her father that the official map is not always the territory. That evening, for the first time in 20 years, she climbed the folding ladder to her attic. She found the box labeled Dad's Geology. Inside were the notebooks, filled with his elegant, precise handwriting. And at the bottom was the cardboard tube. She pulled it out, her heart beating a little faster. She sat at her kitchen table and carefully unrolled the contents. The old deed, the stamped receipt from 1983, and the map, her father's hand-drawn map, with its strange, spidery lines indicating the deep, hidden shape of Vance's folly. She sat there for a long time, the papers spread out under the warm light, the silence of the house around her. The promise was not just about paying a tax. It was about this moment. The moment her father had predicted. The moment when they would come and try to tell her it wasn't hers. Back in the community hall, the air was thick with unspoken questions. Alara Vance reached for the cardboard tube. She uncapped one end and slid out the contents. A document yellowed with age and a hand-drawn map. The paper was brittle at the creases. She carefully unfolded the deed first and laid it on the table. Then she unrolled the map beside it. The contrast with GeoCorp's glossy, computer-generated projection was stark. Hers was a document of human scale, drawn with pencil and ink. Spoke of time and patience. Mr. Davies looked at the old papers with a weary professionalism. It was the first move in what he assumed was a negotiation tactic. Play for more money. He decided to meet it head-on. "Ma'am," he said, his voice taking on a tone of legal precision. "An old map, with all due respect, doesn't supersede a recorded county deed. Our title search was comprehensive. Parcel 7B was sold free and clear." He gestured to the county clerk, an older woman named Margaret Gable, who had been observing the proceedings with a neutral expression. "Margaret, can you confirm the status of this parcel in the county records?" Mrs. Gable adjusted her glasses. She did not consult a computer. She simply knew. The parcel was listed as delinquent and sold at auction on the 12th of last month. The new deed was recorded on the 14th. The purchaser was GeoCorp Minerals. Davies gave Alara a look that was almost an apology. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Vance. The county has spoken. The matter is settled." This was his first argument, an appeal to official final authority. He believed it to be unassailable. Alara did not remove the papers. She did not argue. She simply tapped a finger on a specific paragraph of the old deed she had placed on the table. A paragraph just above her father's signature. Then she pointed to a stamp, faint but still legible, in the bottom corner. It was a county recorder's stamp, dated October 17, 1983. It says, "She spoke quietly that all subsurface rights, including and not limited to mineral, oil, and gas, are severed from the surface title and retained by the grantor, as per the survey and specifications in Addendum A, filed concurrently." She paused, then gently pushed her father's map forward. "This is Addendum A." Davies' associate picked up the old deed, careful not to tear it. He read the paragraph. His eyes widened slightly. He showed it to Davies. A flicker of genuine surprise crossed Davies' face, quickly suppressed. He shifted to his second argument, a procedural one. An addendum like that, a mineral rights severance, is a significant encumbrance. It would have to be properly filed and recorded in the county ledger to be legally binding. Private note on a deed isn't enough. Our title search would have found a recorded severance. It did not. Therefore, it was never legally filed. He was certain of this. A billion-dollar project would not be undertaken without a flawless title search. It was unthinkable. For the first time, Alara reached for the other paper she had brought, the one from her billfold. The small, folded receipt from the tax office, the one she had just gotten 3 weeks ago. No, not that one. She unfolded it, then folded it back and returned it to her pocket. She reached for the old deed again and the map. Tucked behind the map was another receipt, the same size as the one for the taxes, but much older, the paper soft as cloth. It was the original filing receipt from 1983. She placed it on the table. It was for a mineral rights addendum filing. The fee paid was $12. It was stamped with the same date as the deed, October 17, 1983. Davies stared at the small piece of paper. His confidence began to fray at the edges. This was not in the script. This was an artifact from a time before digital records, a piece of paper that should not exist. He moved to his third and weakest argument, an appeal to common sense, a dismissal of the evidence itself. "Mrs. Vance," he said, his voice losing some of its smooth cadence, "this is a very old, unofficial-looking document. And that map, it was drawn by hand. It's not a certified survey. How can we be sure of its legitimacy? How can we know this wasn't something your father simply wrote down for his own records?" The implication was clear. It was a fantasy. A piece of worthless paper. A dead man's hobby. Alara Vance said nothing. She did not defend her father's honor. She did not defend his map. She had laid the facts on the table. She had done her part. Now we wait, she thought. She let the silence do the work. The room waited with her. All eyes in the room turned to Margaret Gable, the county clerk. She had worked in the courthouse for 42 years, since she was a teenager. She had started when the records were all kept in massive, leather-bound ledger books, when a filing meant a physical stamp applied with a firm hand. She had overseen the transition to microfiche, and then to the digital system that now ran on a server in the basement. She knew the new system was efficient, but she also knew it was fallible. She knew that data could be lost in migration, that a misplaced decimal point or an unchecked box by a temp worker in 2003 could erase a piece of history. She looked at the small, stamped receipt from 1983. She recognized the signature of the clerk who had stamped it. A man named Bill Peterson. He had retired in 1999 and passed away 5 years later. She stood up. Her movements were slow, deliberate. "Excuse me," she said to the room. She walked out of the community hall, her sensible shoes making a soft, rhythmic sound on the linoleum floor. The silence she left behind was absolute. Davies whispered urgently to his legal team. They were scrolling frantically on their phones and tablets, searching databases, looking for a loophole, a way to invalidate a ghost. The other landowners just watched Alara. She hadn't moved. She stood with her hands resting lightly on the back of a chair, her posture calm, her breathing even. She was not anxious. She was not triumphant. She was simply present. She had brought the truth into the room. Now the room had to decide what to do with it. 5 minutes passed, then 10. A GeoCorp lawyer went to make a phone call in the hall. He came back, shaking his head. Davies tapped his pen on the table. The rhythmic clicking was the only sound. Finally, the door opened. Mrs. Gable returned. She was carrying something heavy. It was a ledger book. It was huge, nearly 2 feet wide. Its dark green leather cover worn smooth at the corners, and its spine reinforced with thick tape. The word, filings, and the year 1983 were embossed in faded gold leaf on the front. She heaved it onto the table with a solid thud that made the coffee cups jump. The book fell open to a page marked with a thin strip of blotter paper. She ran a careful, wrinkled finger down a column of handwritten entries. The penmanship was a beautiful, looping cursive, a style no longer taught. She stopped. Her finger rested on a single line of ink. She looked up, over the top of her glasses, first at Mr. Davies, then at Alara. She spoke one decisive sentence. The Vance severance, filing number 83 to 714, was recorded on October 17, 1983. She paused. The mineral rights for Parcel 7B were legally severed from the surface title. They were never sold. They were never transferred. According to this ledger, they are still held by the Vance estate. That ended it. The statement was delivered without emotion, a simple declaration of a fact that had been sleeping in a book for nearly 4 decades. The digital record was wrong. The assumption was wrong. The entire foundation of GeoCorp's project, at least in this small corner of the valley, had just crumbled into dust. The corporate smile was gone from Mr. Davies' face. In its place was a tight, controlled mask of professional recalculation. The confidence had evaporated, leaving behind the hard, pragmatic core of a man whose job was to solve problems. Alara Vance had just become a very expensive problem. He huddled with his legal team. Their whispers were sharp, urgent. The other landowners in the room began to talk among themselves, their voices low. They looked at Alara with a new kind of respect. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't made a threat. She had simply come prepared. Davies broke from his huddle. He walked over to Alara, his posture now entirely different. It was no longer condescending. It was the walk of a man approaching an equal, or perhaps a superior. "Mrs. Vance," he said, his voice low and meant for her alone. "Clearly, there has been a significant and regrettable oversight. An error that originated long before any of us were involved." He was already distancing his company from the mistake, framing it as a historical accident. We are prepared to rectify it. Of course, the surface land is yours. The tax auction was invalid, and we will see to it that the title is immediately restored to your name, with all legal fees covered by GeoCorp. He paused, waiting for her to respond. She said nothing. She just watched him, waiting for the rest. He continued, forcing a small, collegial smile. Now, regarding the mineral rights, this is an extraordinary situation. Your father's foresight was remarkable. He chose the word carefully. He wanted to flatter her without admitting the true scale of what her father had found. The lithium vein that GeoCorp's own advanced surveys had confirmed was worth, by conservative estimates, $38 million. A find that would make the company's stockholders very happy. Our project is already in motion, Mrs. Vance. A great deal of capital has been invested. Your parcel is, frankly, critical to the viability of the entire operation. We would like to propose a partnership, a lease agreement. We will offer you a signing bonus of $1 million today, and a 3% royalty on all minerals extracted from your parcel. It was a staggering offer. More money than anyone in that room had ever imagined seeing. It would change her life, her son's life, their lives for generations. He slid a folder across the table toward her. The preliminary offer was inside. He expected her to open it, to look at the numbers, to begin the negotiation. Alara looked at the folder. She did not touch it. I'm not looking for partners, she said. Her voice was as quiet and steady as it had been all morning. Davies was taken aback. This was not a move he had anticipated. He thought this was about money. It was always about money. Forgive me, he said, trying to keep the frustration out of his voice. Then what is it you are looking for? What is it you want? Alara finally looked away from him, her gaze settling on the glossy map propped on the easel, with its bold red lines. I want you to redraw your map, she said. My 40 acres are not part of your project. They are not for lease. They are not for sale. That's all. She was not negotiating. She was stating a fact. The land was hers. The choice was hers. And she had made it. The silence that followed was different. It was the sound of a vast corporate machine grinding to a halt against a small, immovable object. The energy drained from the room. It was like a puncture in a tire. The pressure, the tension, the expectation that had built for hours simply hissed away into nothing. Mr. Davies stood frozen for a moment, his mind cycling through contingencies and finding none that applied. He was a man used to navigating complex legal and financial worlds where everything had a price, a deal point, a lever for negotiation. He had no protocol for a simple, unadorned no. He looked at Alara Vance, at her calm face and her steady eyes, and for the first time he seemed to understand. This wasn't business. It was something else. He gave a single, sharp nod. He turned to his team. Pack it up, he said. His voice was flat, devoid of emotion. The lawyers, who had been watching the exchange with disbelief, began to close their laptops and gather their papers. They moved with a kind of subdued efficiency, the motions of a team that had unexpectedly and decisively lost. They did not look at Alara. They did not look at the other landowners. They looked at their briefcases, at the door, at the path of their retreat. Davies walked back to the table. He picked up the folder with the $1 million offer inside and slid it back into his briefcase. He snapped the latches shut. The sound was loud in the quiet room. He buttoned his suit jacket, a final gesture of professional composure. He looked at Mrs. Gable, the county clerk. We will be in touch with your office to correct the title on Parcel 7B. Then, he turned and walked out of the community hall without a backward glance. His team followed him like a procession of shadows. The other landowners were left in the aftermath. They started to talk, their voices slowly rising to fill the vacuum the corporate men had left behind. One of them, an old farmer named Sam Harding, walked over to Alara. I'll be damned, Alara, he said, a slow grin spreading across his weathered face. You really did it. She gave him a small, tired smile. My father did it, she corrected gently. I just kept the paperwork. She turned back to the table. With the same deliberate care she had shown all morning, she began to gather her things. She folded the old deed along its original creases, the paper whispering its age. She carefully rolled the hand-drawn map and slid it back into its cardboard tube, securing the plastic cap. She picked up the small, crucial receipt from 1983 and tucked it safely back into her billfold. She took a small, spiral-bound notebook and a pen from her coat pocket. She opened it to a blank page and wrote a single line, a notation for her own private ledger. She clicked the pen shut and put it away. The victory, if it could be called that, was utterly silent. There was no celebration, no gloating, just the quiet, methodical packing away of the truth, now that its work was done. She had not come for a fight. She had come to correct an error. The error was now corrected. She picked up her cardboard tube and walked toward the door, nodding to the few neighbors who were still there, her face serene and unreadable. The sun was low, casting long shadows across the valley as Alara Vance stood at the edge of Parcel 7B. A single strand of old barbed wire, strung between leaning cedar posts, marked the boundary.
Her son, Michael, stod beside her.
He had driven up from the city after she called him from the community hall. Her call had been brief, matter-of-fact. "It's done," she'd said. "You should come see it." He looked out at the land. It looked exactly as he had always remembered it. A sloping field of rocks and pale, thin soil, dotted with sagebrush and juniper. It was, by any conventional measure, worthless land. And yet, it was now the most valuable 40 acres in the state. He still couldn't quite grasp the scale of it. $38 million. That was the number the local paper was already speculating about. A number whispered from a source inside GeoCorp. A number she had simply walked away from. "Why, Mom?" he asked. Not as a challenge, but as a genuine question. He was his father's son, a practical man. He understood numbers. He did not understand this. Alara didn't answer right away. She reached out and rested her hand on the top of a fence post, its wood gray and weathered smooth by decades of sun and wind. Her father had set this post with his own hands. She could feel the faint grain of it under her palm, a tangible link to him, to his work, to his quiet belief. Because it was his, she said finally. It was his discovery. It was his proof. A company doesn't get to buy that. Money doesn't get to buy that. It was never about the lithium. It was about the ledger, making the ledger right. She looked out at the sour soil, the land that held the ghost her father had chased. To GeoCorp, it was a resource to be extracted, a commodity. To her father, it was the final page of his life's work. To her, it was a promise to be kept. "What now?" Michael asked. "What do we do with it?" Alara breathed in the cool evening air, the scent of dust and dry grass. "Now," she said, "we let it rest. It's been waiting a long time. There's no hurry. Some things are planted for the next generation." It was an echo of her father's words, a truth that had taken her a lifetime to fully understand. The value was not in the digging. It was in the knowing. The land held its secret, and for now that was enough. It was safe. The ledger was balanced. The promise was paid in full. Promise kept is a powerful thing. But not all promises are written on maps. Some are hidden in the fine print of a will, waiting for a daughter to find a mistake her father made 40 years ago, a mistake that cost a family their home. Next time we go to Ohio, and a woman who learned to read contracts at her kitchen table. We'll see what holds.